But come on, follow me in here. So we're going to work our way back out. Let me start to put these visual aids for you, right? So here you have the color coding, and then you have the diorama that tracks the color coding. So if things start here in 1740 and end with all the colors filled in. So like the blue are the two rooms we just walked through, right? So to get oriented. And now the first house is shown here. So it's just a room in this northwest corner. Like you can see it from where you're standing. You see the doorway. I'll let you all wander around here in a second. And so right at the end of that first Spanish period, Antonio Mesa was a Spaniard, and he lived here for 23 years with his family in what was a house when it had a roof on it, that room over there. And then the British came, and they added the first edition shown here. So you'll see some represented British dress on the mannequins there. And it was interesting that the British, you think where they are, we'll look at the map later on, but it's the North Sea, so they're farther north, so they felt obliged to put a fireplace in the house. And the Spanish hardly ever put a fireplace in a house because they were used to the Mediterranean climate, and floors kind of like it. And then after the war, so the Revolutionary War occurs here, and then the British lose, and so, they're not interested in being here anymore, so they leave. And the yellow was another Spaniard, so the second edition of the house was done by a fellow named Sanchez. And you have to kind of imagine, so that would have gone down that way and around the corner back in the day, and then also that's when the upstairs started going. And then finally, the two rooms we walked in through, they were added. That 1821 is when Fort becomes a territory. So they were added during basically the early American period and on into the 20th century. Like there were 5 or 6 private owners. And then at that point, it's like the town and the city are going, wait a minute. This house and some others in this colonial quarter that are, deteriorating, and they're kind of precious history items. And so they renovated a few and reconstructed things. And so that's what you see here. So it's really cool. Now you do have to stay downstairs. It's on the historical register, fragile structure, so we don't, sometimes I'll have 50 people, so we don't do tours up there, but there's a lot to see down here. I just have to go back and see when they're going to get out of the blacksmith shop, but I'll be right back. But take a little time, wander around. Sure. There's some great pictures. Yeah, and you'll see in some of the pictures that the bones of this place in between the stucco and the plaster is coquina, and that's what the fort's made out of. They use that in their homes too. All right, I'll be right back. There's water outside on the way in. I don't know if you noticed that too, so help yourself.
Thank you.
So let's look at the map here for a sec, because I want to, like I said, I want to get to think. Yeah, so there's the United States, right? Right? But this shows how they got here back in the day. Usually they go at these latitudes, coming over and going back. That's fine. That's fine. So now the southern latitude they would use because trade winds off of Africa would give them more wind in their sails, and they had studied the winds. And so actually this is the route that Columbus took, right? He was trying to get around the world over to the east, and he ran into the Bahamas, but he came initially at that latitude, and then they would often then head back to Spain or actually even to England or France or wherever on this latitude, because the Gulf Stream, another Mother Nature thing, and it's still alive today. I talked to sailors who were moored, here we are in St. Augustine, right? So moored in the river out here, they say, yeah, we get about 3 extra knots if we stay at that latitude. So it's like a spinning gyro of current that's going east. It changes the temperature of the water and it adds current. So basically those were the routes that they were taking. Of course, we've been talking mostly about Spain, England, France, the Netherlands. We haven't talked about too much, but they were early explorers. In fact, Manhattan was New Amsterdam, founded by the Dutch in 1623. And then, of course, they're coming over to, they call it the New World, right? And now we call it North America, the US and Canada, Central America with Mexico, it's always in the news, right? Cortez, the great conquistador, was there. And then down in the Caribbean and South America. The Portuguese and the Spanish were sort of biased toward the equator and below, right, when you think about it. I mean, the Spanish were in California, but I mean, on the East Coast, they really weren't any farther north than South Carolina. The British kind of kicked them out of South Carolina. And so it was mostly British and French up in here and on into Canada. But then down here, it was really the Portuguese and the Spanish. So my son-in-law, he's from Brazil. So I have two grandkids, Juliana and Lily, that they speak Portuguese. Oh. Almost better than English. And they frustrate me because his parents don't speak English very well, and we get together with Vovo and Vova. and I want them to translate now. You know, they're like 11 and 9. They go, Grandpa, you got to learn that. They had no help. And we tried doing like the what's it, Pinsler or whatever. I mean, we were first meeting his parents years ago. It's tough when you get older to learn a language. That's why it's so great when you're young. So anyway, I digress. So now, when you go look at the ship, I want you to think about being on that thing for, first off, a long time. So it was 2 months for Menendez to get from here to here. He first saw land in Puerto Rico, and then he came up here. But June 28th, August 28th. So it's a long trip. On a small ship like that, you're on the main deck the whole time. Like someone's going down into the hold to get you fresh water and dried meat and things that'll keep you alive for 2 months. But you're sleeping on a mat on the deck at night, and with about 20 people, you're hoping to get along. So then you're hoping not to get scurvy. You're hoping you don't go over the side in the storm. You're exposed to the sun, June 28th, August 28th, right? Here we are in Florida. We were just talking about it, right? No SPF 50. So, I mean, they were probably shrouded like Bedouins in the desert, right? I mean, they just kind of covered up, right? Now, but then the risk that I didn't totally appreciate was the navigation. So when they're out in the middle of the ocean back in the day, have you guys been on the Pirate Museum? Anyone go over there? Okay. If you get a chance, if you go there, you'll see we have a nice navigation display that shows things like early instruments that were used to look at the heavens and find out your position on the earth. So octants, sextants, astrolabes, and so forth. So And Menendez's day, he would have had a navigator, you know, probably one on each ship, someone who would understand navigation. When they got away from Spain and got out in the middle of the ocean, they would be able at night to take a reading and do some geometry, like between the North Star and the horizon, and calculate where they were in an angle. That's the latitude angle on the Earth. So, like here we are in St. Augustine at 27.5 degrees latitude, I think north. But the longitude thing, but now, because you want to know how far you've gone and how much more you got to go, you need to know longitude. Like, you know, what's the difference in longitude between here and here? And when they tried to do that in the stars, because the Earth spins around, it's harder to do your calculation. It's not a static reference like it is in this dimension where the Earth's not spinning. So it's kind of a subtle thing. But in the end, and so it became a big problem. So sailors would drown because ships ran aground, that kind of thing. And then the crowns in Europe, the kings and queens, they're going, hey, we've got to solve this problem. I mean, how can we project our power around the world if we can't keep our ships safe and our sailors, you know? So they actually had and this is long after Menendez is here. So they had an active parliament. And in the active parliament, it said, hey, anybody, it could have been you, it could have been a great scientist like Newton, the Apple guy was involved, and Galileo. If you can solve what they call the longitude problem, they said, we'll pay you 20,000 pounds, which is like, in today's currency, like $2 million. And so everybody's scrambling out trying to fix the problem. And it turns out that the guy who fixed the problem, he wasn't even an astronomer. He was just a simple carpenter, clockmaker, and his name was John Harrison. He was an Englishman. So you wonder, well, how did he solve the problem? Well, if you know that there's a relationship between longitude and time, which we do because, well, where's my globe? So let me get the globe. It's much better to look at the globe. So when the Earth, you know, in one day, right, the Earth makes one rotation, 24 hours. But that's also 360 degrees geometrically in longitude. So now, 360 divided by 24, they knew that 1 hour is equal to 15 degrees of longitude. So I can convert. If I can get a difference between where I was and where I am in time, I just multiply by 15 and I'll know. If it's 3 hours, I've done 45 degrees of longitude. If it's 4 hours, I've done 60 and so forth. So it was simple arithmetic. But the rub was, in order to do that calculation, you have to know after you've gone, and days later, months later, whatever, you have to know what time it is here to see the difference between where you are and where you were. And the only way to know that time is to carry time with you on the ship and have a good timepiece. So as the day goes by, you know, it's 24 hours, you add it to the original time and keep going. Well, when you think about it, back in the day, they had nothing in the way of a timekeeping mechanism that would work on a ship. That was the problem. So, I mean, the ultimate thing is, think about a grandfather clock with a pendulum. Anything with a pendulum that's doing the ticking of time, you got to measure time ticking it. It's not going to work on a ship like in waves. So it would either lose or gain time, and everyone's going to, like, Newton couldn't even figure out how do we come up with a clock with this simple carpenter. He was a genius at making land clocks, and he goes, well, going on a ship, we just can't have as many moving parts. And maybe we have to power it a little differently. So there were no pendulums or anything. He used springs and almost like, what's that term, like Rube Goldberg, like contraption things, but ultimately he came up with something that worked on a ship and kept good time so that they could compute longitude, and it was called the marine chronometer. And there's a book about it, it's called Longitude, right? So and there's an Amazon Prime movie too, so you don't have to read the book, but it's a nice little bit of science and history, so if you get a chance, check it out. All right, so let's go look at the ship, and or the blacksmith shop, so everyone will go there, so follow me. So back in the day, I mean, they really didn't know they were kind of going east-west that long until they got a marine chronometer.